Hola, buenas tardes. Buenas tardes a todas y todos las personas asistentes a este webinar de hoy, que como sabéis se enmarca en el máster en violencia sexual de la Universidad Ramon Llull. Cada mes hacemos una de las sesiones abiertas con alguna de nuestras expertas en alguna cuestión relativa a la violencia sexual. Y hoy tenemos la suerte de contar con la doctora Ingeborg Kraus con nosotros. La sesión, como sabéis, para las personas que ya habéis participado, la primera parte es abierta para todo el público, con lo cual hasta las 7:30 aproximadamente será abierta y después cerraremos esta sesión de Zoom porque nos encontraremos únicamente con el alumnado del máster en violencia sexual. Muy bien, empezaré presentando a la doctora Ingeborg Kraus, que es doctora en psicología y psicoterapeuta, especialista en trauma, de reconocido prestigio internacional. Ella trabajó entre 1995 y 1999 con víctimas de violación como arma de guerra en Bosnia. Y desde hace ya años trabaja en Alemania como psicoterapeuta con víctimas de trata y prostitución. A través de sus estudios ha llegado a la conclusión que no hay diferencias entre la trata de mujeres y la prostitución y se ha especializado en el análisis de las consecuencias que tiene a distintos niveles la legalización de la prostitución. Esta tarde tenemos el privilegio de poderla escuchar con una conferencia titulada El fracaso de la ley alemana sobre prostitución. La prostitución desde el punto de vista de la psicotraumatología. La conferencia se centra en las consecuencias de la legalización de la prostitución en su país, el modelo regulacionista de la prostitución instaurado en Alemania, que ha generado y agravado la explotación sexual de muchísimas mujeres. Por ello, analizará el caso alemán y los efectos que tiene sobre las mujeres prostituidas. Desde el punto de vista de la psicología, analizará cómo se ha ignorado la violencia que sufren las mujeres y sus consecuencias y argumentará contra el concepto de la prostitución voluntaria. Además, mostrará que la mayoría de las mujeres que ejercen la prostitución sufrieron algún tipo de violencia en la infancia, física o sexual, y también explicará las características de la disociación y del estrés postraumático que afectan a un porcentaje altísimo de mujeres prostituidas. Dear Ingeborg, thank you for being today with us. This is such a privilege for us. So what I'm going to do now is sharing the PowerPoint, the presentation that Ingeborg Kraus is going to use in her conference. And I'm going to be changing the slide every time that Ingeborg asks about this. Okay, I guess that you must be watching this. Is it
Yes.
okay?
It works
Okay.
perfectly. So hello everybody, and I'm very honored to participate on this master on sexual violence. And I will just start, my presentation. So in Sweden, in 1999, it was the first country in the world to introduce the Nordic model. The legalization, or also called the regulation model, has become synonymous to the German model. It was established in Germany in 2022. So we had two total opposite legislations that have been installed nearly at the same times in Europe. More than 20 years have passed, and we can see the results. So we know the outcome of each model. No country needs to do experiments anymore. With the legalization model, Germany became the brothel of Europe and made our country to an El Dorado for traffickers, pimps, and brothel keepers. If you choose the German model, you will increase violence against women in prostitution, but also across the society. You will normalize prostitution, make prostitution increase, and make your country to a magnet and a breeding ground for sex buyers. We have a law against trafficking, but it gets useless if a law that legalizes prostitution. So listen to our experience, and you can go to the page 3. Exactly. So here is a picture of two politicians from the left wing, together with Felicita Schiro, who was a brothel owner in Berlin, celebrating the new law. This was in 2001, and in 2002, this law came into action. The pro-prostitution lobby was infiltrated into politics, and unfortunately, it is still. They started at that time together a campaign where they said prostitution is a job as any other. Next page, please. Sex work is work. Yeah. This was their campaign. The politicians thought that it wasn't prostitution itself that was the problem, but the discrimination of the women. When Sandra Norak, a survivor of trafficking, escaped prostitution, she said that in the end, the German state didn't say anything else as her lover boy trafficker said to her. Sex work is work. So she trusted him because the state said to her the same thing. It's not dangerous. She wasn't warned about it. The German government started using the same language as the traffickers and pimps. With this pimp language, they direct the women into a trap. Next page, please. Far from protecting the women, the German model has become hell on earth for them. The sexual exploitation has become industrialized overnight. We witnessed the creation of mega brothels with the capacity to accommodate around 1,000 sex buyers at once and even more. Prostitution has risen up to 30% since 2002. It has nothing to do with sexual liberation. It is just the money that counts. The profit of this business is enormous. We are talking about 15 billion euros of direct transactions every year. Next page. We observe also a reduction of the rate of pay for women. They get 30 euros for sexual intercourse, while they must pay up to 170 euros for a room and 20 euros taxes per day. So they have to serve 6 men before starting earning money. These women are subjected to the rules of a free market capitalism at its roughest. Next page. We had flat rate brothels. For 70 euros, they offer a beer, a sausage, and unlimited women. Next page. So even after the reform of the law in 2017, where flat rate brothels have been forbidden, this is what you get today, officially. For 69 euros, you get 2 women and all drinks for free. Germany is at the moment still hopping from one small reform to the other without questioning their law in itself. You cannot regulate prostitution because prostitution is in itself a system of violence. And in a legalized environment, the profiteers will find a way to continue their business based on sexual exploitation. Next page. So here is a picture of a so-called juicer. The women are reduced to a pissoir. Next page. Here's another picture of it. Next page. Or here boxes to do certain things that are considered as a solution to street prostitution in Berlin. Out of 400,000 prostituted women, less than 100 are registered as independent businesses. And only 33,000, so less than 10%, are registered since 2017. Because since then, women have to register. The vast majority remains illegal. which means that they have no access to a social system that would allow them to see a doctor. The German state permits the exploitation of these women and supports them being crushed by the sex industry, and yet doesn't even include them in a social welfare system. So the main goal that wanted to bring them out of the darkness has totally failed. Next page. With a law normalizing prostitution, the behavior of the sex buyers became perverted overnight. Whose message to men is that there is a right to pay sexual acts and there is no need to feel guilty about it anymore. The clients therefore see themselves entitled to demand more and more services to the lowest price. Here is a list of 26 sexual services that a friend of mine has found 7 years ago in several brothels. You can go next page. I don't want to, describe everything. You can see it. And if you go next page, you know that we had a reform in 2017, where they said that some sexual acts are against the human dignity. And this is here a list of 32 sexual services that one woman has to offer in a legal brothel in my hometown today. No. The German law made it possible that today completely legally you can buy a woman and piss her in her face, get sexual services like anal, fisting, deep throat, licking balls, licking the anus, kissing, and to men, and so on and so on. I was at the German parliament 4 years ago speaking to the parliamentarians, and I showed them this list. And I asked them if they haven't understood something, do you really see their sexual services and not sexual violence? I asked them. You, I said, became yourself victim of your own law that covers up violence against women. And you are responsible for the development of sexual practices that are totally incompatible with human dignity. Next page, please. In Germany, a normative effect has taken place with this law. It's not uncommon for German men to celebrate stag nights in brothels or for soccer clubs to visit them after a game. This law has established and consolidated a culture called brothel culture and reinforced the rape culture. You can see publicity everywhere. Violence against women became a structural violence. It means that society and the institutions are not questioning it anymore. It is accepted. Next page. 30 years ago, it was estimated that 1.2 million men buy sex every day in Germany. So approximately 1 out of 3 or 4 men. By normalizing prostitution and guaranteeing a total decriminalization of the sex buyers, this law has contributed to an explosion of the demand. Today, we have to ask ourselves, how many men are there left in Germany who are not sex buyers? Next page. There has been a research done 2 years ago about sex buyers, and they found out that every 4th man is a sex buyer. But I asked myself, and these were researchers who were more pro-prostitution, and I asked myself if this is reflecting reality, knowing that 93% of the Germans watch porn. Who are the sex buyers? There is no profile. The men come from all social classes. There are 100% men aged between 18 and 87. 60% are married or in a relationship, and 70% are fathers. This was a research done by Fondation Cell among 600 sex buyers who were caught and took part in an awareness program. Next page. I was part of a study on sex buyers with Melissa Farley in Germany, and I interviewed some of them. I mean, exactly 14. An interview lasted 2 to 3 hours. And the question was, do they know about what they are doing? Yes, the vast majority knows. 50 out of the 103 sex buyers interviewed knew that the prostituted woman was under control of a pimp. One man said it's like he is her owner. 35% believed that 50 to 90% of the prostitutes were abused during their childhood. 55% believed that the entry into prostitution for the vast majority of women was through deception and trafficking. How the client think the prostitute feels while she is with her client. Here are some responses: empty, disgust, dirty, physically and emotionally suffering, scared, trying to switch off, blocking out her thoughts. And the question, what is prostitution? This is what the client said. You pay for the convenience. It's a bit like going to a public loo. Next page. I also have sex buyers in a therapy, and I motivate them to think about what they have split off that would have made them realize that what they did to the women was experienced as a form of violence by the women. So here are a few answers. I booked a woman for 12 hours for New Year's Eve, and after we had sex, she stopped talking to me. She was unresponsive for the remaining 10 hours. Another woman only wanted to have sex in complete darkness. Most of women went into the bathroom after sex and stayed there for a very long time. When they came out, I had to leave immediately. One woman said that it was better for men to go to prostituted women instead of raping women. And when she said that, she almost cried, because she realized what she experienced in prostitution every day. One woman said, no woman wants that. She was Greek, and added that without her money, her family would starve. Another sex buyer was a regular customer of a woman and learned from her that she was sexually abused by her father in her childhood. Then I asked him, well, I think she needed something else and sex with a stranger. Why did you keep seeing her? And he said, because I paid for it. Another sex buyer said, I saw her shaking, and she told me that she didn't want to do it, that she was only doing it for the money. And I asked, and what did you do then? And the sex buyer said, well, I had sex with her. And I asked him, why did you do it? She didn't want it. And the client said, yes, but I pay for it. And that is exactly what prostitution is. You pay for unwanted sex. The exchange of money seemed to justify the rape for these men. But for the women, it remains a rape that remains unpunished, a law that allows the purchase of sex makes a perpetrator invisible, and victims are no longer perceived as victims. This is how men become perpetrators. These are not psychopaths who go to prostituted women. Of course, they also exist, but they remain a minority. These are predominantly normal men who exhibit reckless behavior. They then split off their actions, this part of their personality that has committed sexual violence against women does not remain completely split off. The membrane between the everyday ego of these men and their perpetrator ego remains fluid. What they experience and lived as clients in prostitution is partly transferred to their behavior with women in everyday life. And this is actually what the psychiatrist also said when they analyzed the accomplice of Mr. Pellicot in the trial of Gisèle Pellicot. They say that those men totally split off a part of themselves that committed sexual violence. Next page, please. To justify their behavior, they have to believe in false ideas linked to the dehumanization of the prostituted women and to patriarchal beliefs. Claudine Le Gardinier and Saïd Bouamama also interviewed sex buyers in France already in 2006, and they found out that those men were constantly lying to themselves, as they lie concerning their own situations. You know, they say, oh, I'm so poor guy, and you know, I have some needs. They lie about the situation of the prostituted woman herself. You know, they say she wants it. They lie about the prostitution situation in itself. They think she's enjoying it. They lie about the sexual satisfaction. They lie about what constitutes male strength and identity. Next page. The experience of buying a woman for sex does something to men. It changes their attitude towards women and their ability for empathy. It turns them into perpetrators. This is a comparative study done by Melissa Farley between sex buyers and men who don't buy sex. And she found out that sex buyers have a similar emotional structure to sexually violent men, namely lack of empathy, the absence of a guilty conscience, antisocial behavior, a preference for impersonal sex, a negative attitude towards women, and a desire to dominate them. And this is also what I see in therapy. I mean, it has become very difficult for women, you know, to find normal men, you know, just to have a normal relationship. Next page, please. Many studies on sex buyers have proved that they know about the situation of the women, but a law that guarantees them impunity disconnects them from the capacity of empathy. And this is also listed in the OCE report from 2021, Discouraging the Demand. This is the title of this report. The driving force behind this form of human trafficking, which is also the most lucrative and whose profit are estimated at $1 billion a year, is money. The petrol is the demand. Therefore, the OSCE strongly encourages its participating states to review their criminal justice responses to reduce the demand. Several aspects should be taken into account. Sex buyers are directly and indirectly responsible for the immense suffering inflicted on trafficked victims. States need to be aware of the severity and seriousness of the problem. Sex buyers cannot or do not want to identify victims of human trafficking. States need to be aware of the messages they want to convey to society, especially with regard to the protection of vulnerable people, as criminal laws also set social norms. Since 2017, in Germany, we have a law that punishes sex buyers who have consciously used a trafficked person. We had so far only one condemnation, so it's a useless law. Sex purchase must be banned as a whole. Next page, please. Legal sex purchase increases sexual violence against women across society. In the past 10 years in Germany, there is an increasement of rape of 60% and an increasement of gang rapes of 50%. All forms of sexual violence against women have increased since then. You can now argue that other factors have perhaps influenced these increasements, like, we have a higher number of migrants, for example. But there's one state in America that does not show these demographic changes. I will talk about this later. And the argument that prostitution would protect against rape in society is hereby refuted. Next page, please. Prostitution not only has devastating effects on the women in prostitution, but also on the deceived women who call themselves shadow women. There are women who are cheated on by their husband. There are women who are cheated on by their husbands with prostituted women. They are in the shadow of the prostitution system, and this tragical collateral damage of prostitution is still not focused on at all. Around 1 to 2 billion men, and even more are said, go to brothels every day, assuming of course that it is not always the same sex buyer, and assuming that there are a large number of married clients or clients living in a steady relationship. The number of women who have been deceived and, if discovered, emotionally injured is certainly in the tens of millions without exaggeration. So we must conclude from this that Germany is a country of cheated women. Prostitution also destroys the ability to love, and therefore our fundamental value system. Trust, mutual respect, and real intimacy become impossible. The system of prostitution pollutes human relationship, and the gaze of the sex buyers is transferred to all women. Next page, please. Studies show that prostitution does not decrease violence against women in society, but quite the opposite, encourages it. This is the example I wanted to show you. In the US, prostitution law is a state-level matter. And in the last 40 years, only one of the 51 American states has chosen to completely legalize prostitution and sex buying. It's Nevada. And it's no coincidence that Nevada has some of the highest rates of violence against women in the US. The most victims of domestic violence. The third highest rate of rape and sexual assault. And the fourth highest in femicides. Nearly half of all women in Nevada have been raped, experience physical violence, and or have been stalked. So the hidden message of legalized sex purchase is that men have a right for sex and that women have to be available for that. These are rape messages that encourage men to become sex buyers and to disrespect the feelings of the women. Next page. The makeup of the women in prostitution has changed since the legalization. Today, around 95% of the prostituted women come from the poorest region of Europe. Next page. Those women have special vulnerabilities. They are often alone, they have left their families behind them, don't speak the language, don't know their rights, have no profession, or are young, poor, have perhaps debts, belong to an ethnic minority, have perhaps an illegal status and are afraid of the police or are pre-traumatized. Next page. In the Palermo Protocol from 2011, which is the guideline for all European countries to adopt for the fight against human trafficking, the definition of human trafficking includes also scam, fraud, abuse of power, or the exploitation of special vulnerabilities. So you don't need physical violence to commit human trafficking or forced prostitution. The abuse of power can take place when the person feels compelled to accept the exploitation. It took Germany 5 years to implement this EU directive on better protection against human trafficking with its paragraph 232 of the German Criminal Code. As I said, in 2016 only. And in its implementation, Germany did not include the terms of abuse of power and exploitation of special vulnerabilities. So it's therefore still doubtful today whether Germany has really fulfilled its duty here. In a context where prostitution is seen as a job as any other, those special vulnerabilities are not taken into account, but are even seen as qualification characteristics to enter into prostitution. With this law, we are not only shutting down our eyes towards the criminal offenses that are listed in the Palermo Protocol. We are even seeing prostitution as a solution for those special vulnerabilities. Women told me that they were often told that they can be happy to work here in Germany. Prostitution is seen as an option against poverty. Next page. In every bigger town, we have counseling centers for prostitutes, but they just help women to remain in prostitution, like distributing condoms and so on. They even offer entry advice into prostitution or brothel tours. So they are also part of the system that downplays the harm. They have not developed necessary qualification to help women to exit prostitution. This became very clear during the Corona period when many women wanted to exit. The counseling centers were completely overwhelmed at that time. Many did not even have the possibility to offer them a shelter or support them financially. Next page. Some official counseling centers even offered sex work as an option to the Ukrainian war refugee in April 2022. This is a quote from the homepage of one of them. I'm quoting it. It is very common for people to do sex work in a time of need and financial insecurity. Fleeing war is one of those. Sex work is a way to make money anonymously, with no work permit, without education certificates, and without speaking much German or English. I reported this to the police in Berlin, and the answer was, they went to this counseling office and talked with them, and reported me back that this is a state-funded institution and sex work is legal in Germany. So they did nothing. Today, every second woman in prostitution in Berlin is now a Ukrainian war refugee. When I found this out, I sent a letter to the Parliamentary Committee for Families and Women, quoting this. The answer from the left parties was, we want to make a difference between voluntary prostitution and trafficking. So they even see prostitution as a voluntary act for war refugees. This is crazy. Next page, please. And I got this letter just a couple of days ago, the answer. This law didn't help to prevent trafficking at all. This graphic shows the identified victims from 2011 to 2023. Less and less every year. Next page. The same with the completed legal proceedings. This does not indicate a decrease in actual cases, but shows how liberalized policy causes a lack of ability to investigate this crime. The police feels helpless and complains that they have just little power to intervene. They say that this law is trafficker-friendly and leaves the women unprotected. Next page, please. Perhaps you still think that you can open clean brothels in order to protect the women the best. Well, the brothel owner Jürgen Rudloff campaigned for clean prostitution with his concept of wellness oasis for men. For him, the usual side effects of the milieu, trafficking, forced prostitution, exploitation, should play no role. The reality was different. What women reported about life in the Paradise Brothel does not at all fit into its public image of being a wellness oasis. They reported having felt stuck in a never-ending hell. According to the victims, humiliation and violence were part of daily life and were freely tolerated by the brothel operators. Jürgen Rudloff was convicted for aiding and abetting severe human trafficking, forced prostitution, and fraud, and sentenced to 5 years in prison in 2019 and a 1.3 million fine. Strangely, the Paradise Brothel reopened just a few days after this court ruling. Why? Because the national economy was involved in the company through loans. A closure would have put many companies in Stuttgart in financial distress. This example shows how the German economy is involved in the sexual exploitation of women. Next page, please. So it is illusionary to believe that a legal sector keeps human trafficking at bay. The biggest underground sector is found within legal brothels. In many brothels, especially large so-called mega businesses, but also in the street prostitution sector, one finds predominantly young foreign women who are highly likely in situation of exploitation. The expert of authorities who are familiar with the situation of the ground, on the ground, are usually aware of these women, that these women are controlled and exploited by third parties. Proving this requires extensive investigation of concrete causes of suspicion and usually bolstered by a statement of the victim. And this rarely ever occurs due to reasons like violence, threats, intimidations. So we have a minimum of 100,000 women in Germany who are victims of human trafficking. 1,000 times more than recognized by the police. Only a fraction of women are ever identified. The lawmakers are tolerating a situation where most victims are never identified and the crimes committed against them are never prosecuted. I made this graphic just to see it visually. Next page, please. We have to assume that 90% of the women in prostitution are victims of human trafficking. A minimum of 90%. That's why we are rightly called the brothel of Europe. This is known in Europe and Germany. This is known in Europe, and Germany is being called on international level to do something about this. The worldwide warnings to Germany are piling up without Germany reacting. So you can show the next page. I have listed here on 3 pages the main conventions and agreements that call Germany to change direction in its policy. So, I mean, I don't want to, you know, cite everything. You can go to next page, but it started already in the year 2000. 2014, the European Parliament said that, called to implement the Nordic model. Also, the Council of Europe, in a G7 meeting in Biarritz in 2019, the Nordic model was recommended. As I said, the OSCE also encouraged to implement the Nordic model. Next page, please. To discourage the demand. In 2022, the UN General Assembly also called the state to eliminate the requirement to purchase sexual acts and so on. I mean, you know, Germany is constantly addressed to do something, and for the moment they're not doing anything. Next page, please. Now I'm talking about the second part of my lecture. Prostitution from the perspective of psychotraumatology. This is very important because the police goes into the brothels to make their usual control and ask the women if everything is all right. And they say yes. And this was it. Even if almost all of the women who said yes are trafficked. Many policemen became blamed towards the mechanism of trafficking. They have a wrong picture of how a victim has to look like. They think they have to look for metal chains, a woman running towards them and screaming. In most of the cases, the victim is silenced and has mental chains that keeps her in the exploitation. And this is so important to understand for all people working in this field. Severe human rights crimes don't take place loudly in the system of prostitution, but in silence. Now I would like to introduce you to some of the psychological mechanisms who silence the victims and makes them defenseless. Pre-traumatization, trauma bonding, PTSD, complex PTSD, introduction of the perpetrator, dissociation, fear, parts who stay loyal to the offender, and the offender-victim reversal. I will explain all of this now. Next page. Many women have established a traumatic bond to their perpetrators. Some of them are sent by their own families, or a person that promises a better future, by a lover boy, or they have experienced violence in their childhood and think that they deserve mistreatment. We need to understand the close connection between trauma, prostitution, and trafficking. In a climate where prostitution can be practiced as a job as any other, the institutions have developed so good as no qualification to understand the psychological mechanism and what prostitution does to a woman. With a law that makes prostitution legal, human trafficking is happening in the middle of society, in legal environment, and nobody sees it. Next page, please. Both prostitution and voluntary prostitution are inextricably linked. The entry into prostitution is usually precessed by experience of violence in childhood. In this context, it's inappropriate to speak of free choice. Here too, there are countless studies showing a connection between violence experiences in childhood and prostitution. Many women lacked protection in childhood and consequently didn't learn self-protection. They are already separated from their feelings before they go into prostitution and have not developed a strong self-esteem. So this is here. These are just a couple of studies where they find out how many women experience sexual violence or physical violence in their childhood. So, but there are much more studies on this. Next page, please. We must note that this kind of violence is classified as trauma type 2 in an interpersonal close environment. It is the most traumatic trauma and has the heaviest consequences. Next page. When you are a victim of repeated sexual violence, you develop mental responses. You get a feeling of worthlessness and being disconnected to the world. Trust in people and relationships is deeply shaken. Own limits are not known. A deep feeling of hopelessness. You have difficulties to regulate your emotions, and you have dissociative symptoms. You are often disconnected from yourself. This is called complex trauma. So many women start grown-up life with complex trauma. Next page, please. The re-victimization is very high. It is 16 times more likely for a woman who suffers physical and sexual intimate partner violence if that woman was physically and sexually abused as a child. Those women, as I said, have learned to protect themselves in an environment of violence where they couldn't escape. They enter adult life with those special traumatic responses on their abuse. Those vulnerabilities are misused by the sex industry. These are girls who have been dropped down a first time as children in a harmful close environment and are dropped down a second time as adults in the violent system of prostitution. Next page, please. Violence becomes a known and familiar relationship pattern. This is why victims of sexual exploitation often repeat this type of victims of sexual violence repeat this type of relationship where they have learned to survive and control the situation. They therefore accept violence once again. When entering prostitution, many say that it was completely normal for them because they thought not being worthy of something better. Prostitution in this case is a continuation of violence in the biography of these women. The pimps and brothel operators use the pre-traumatization for their own purpose. So next page. I will go to the next page because it's more or less a repetition. I would also like to explain the loverboy method to bring women into prostitution. So I explain it with this graphic. The traffickers are searching, especially for vulnerable young women, women who come from a broken home or live in poverty or some other kinds of vulnerability. Also, adolescents rebelling against their parents are also in a vulnerable phase of life. For example, in Africa, they look for them at water points. In Europe, they look for them in big department stores when they're just open, when girls should be in school, or in the internet. When I was in Kosovo, just after the war, the lover boys were going to the villages searching for young women who perhaps have lost a parent. I know such a case, a minor woman who lost her parents, both in war, and lived with her grandmother in a village. Then the lover boy trafficker connects with her and gives her positive attention. This is something totally new for her, and the victim will establish a deep emotional relationship to the offender. He will tell her very fast that he loves her and make her believe in a better future with him. After that, the devaluation, threats, and subtle punishment will start. You are not good enough. You can be lucky that I'm with you. I could be with many others, and so on. It reinforces the thought I'm worthless. I have to do exactly what he wants from me to keep him. Or I deserve mistreatment because I did something wrong. The victim internalizes the offender's view. The self-esteem gets destabilized. The victim will be step by step isolated and controlled. So next page, please. The consequences are victims completely adapt to the needs of the offender. Own feelings and needs are no longer perceived. Self-protection and self-care gets lost. The victim develops a negative self-image. The idea of being worthless, morally inferior, as the person may be linked to the belief that mistreatment and punishment can be deserved. Because of her fear losing the bond, the victim starts to deny the negative aspects of the relationship and puts the blame on her if he's unhappy. She starts to feel responsible for his well-being, and her attention is addressed on his needs. She develops a deep loyalty to him. Next page, please. Once the victim is conditioned and made emotionally addicted to the offender, the second phase starts. Prostitution will become a topic to help him out of debts. Prostitution as a fast solution to help him out of problems. I asked the victim of a lover boy how she felt when she decided to do it. And she said, well, I felt as a hero that would help her prince. So she was ready to sacrifice herself without hesitating. A lover boy trafficker was condemned a couple of years ago in Germany, and he had 15 women working for him at the same time. And he said that 90% of the women he asked said immediately yes. Only 1 out of 10 said no. Once she gets in this milieu, the trap closes and she will get deeply traumatized with each sex buyer. He will then start showing his real side of himself, be violent and exploit her. This woman who told me who was in therapy in my office, who said, I felt like a hero. And he said, just stay 2 weeks. She stayed 10 years in prostitution. Next page, please. And on top of that, she will think that all of this happened because of her, because she thinks that she agreed on everything. She will believe that it was her choice to get into this relationship and into prostitution. The victim is not aware of being a victim of a trafficker and a manipulative strategy. She puts the blame on herself for what happened to her. So these are a couple of sentences I heard from some victims, you know. I agreed on it. I didn't defend myself. It was my choice. Next page, please. And even if they leave prostitution, parts of oneself can stay loyal to the offender or to the milieu a long time. Like this are also some sentences I heard. It's not his fault, he was in trouble, or he's on my side, he helped me when I was in need. Some also say there were also positive sides in the milieu. It was good money and so on. Takes a long time, you know, to exit mentally from prostitution. Next page, please. From the perspective of health, prostitution cannot be seen as an option in no way. Our association, Trauma and Prostitution, considers the buying of sex as an act of violence against women, and it should not be allowed at all. Sexuality requires an interplay of mind and body. In order to be penetrated by strangers, it is necessary to switch off instinctual reaction which otherwise would inevitably occur, like fear, shame, alienation, disgust, contempt, smell, pain, and so on. The phenomenon of switching off is called dissociation. The use of the vagina as an unfeeling work instrument is only possible in a state of dissociation. This required dissociation either takes place after the first sex buyer and settles deeper and deeper with each sex buyer, or it has already taken place before the start of prostitution because of the pre-traumatization, as I said. Here I just showed the brain and the parts who implemented this dissociation, like the amygdala and the hippocampus. And during dissociation, your cortex doesn't function fully. And yes, exactly, just that you, and just to say the hippocampus, which is in green, it has the function to contextualize the situation, so that you can say, you know, today we are Monday, 2nd of September, I'm holding now a speech this is my ability to context the situation. When you are triggered or when you are under dissociation, the hippocampus doesn't work anymore. So you cannot contextualize the situation. And when you have a PTSD and you get triggered, some people feel like it's happening now again, even if it happened 10 years ago. Yes, just that you understand a little bit how it functions. And the amygdala has two functions. It's the trauma memory, but it's also reacts and puts you in a situation of fight and flight or dissociation. I will explain it now. Next page, please. So if you experience a trauma, your body reacts in a way to protect you the best. It activates a physical reaction so that you can fight or run away. This is the amygdala that is doing it. if you can't escape a situation, so it puts you in a fight and flight reaction, but if you can't escape the situation, you get away with your mind. It's as if an electrical cable is being cut off. You dissociate, and under dissociation, the awareness and the memory is affected. Like you feel like being in trance. The body feeling is affected. Feels like numbness, like standing by side, like looking a scene from far away. The perception of the environment is affected, like looking through a tunnel, or everything is foggy. The identity is affected, playing a role or being confused about the own identity. And of course, you know, you cannot switch off the button of dissociation as you want. I had a woman in therapy, and she exited prostitution and a long time, but she said that everything, you know, she perceived reality like behind a very thick wall of glass. Yeah. And this is, you know, the dissociation was still on. And this is what a social worker in Italy told me. When the women are new on the street, they cry, or they still have feelings. They say that they want to leave, and a couple of days later, they are like stunned. One woman explained it to me like this. First, you have to disconnect yourself from your body, then from your mind. And I asked her, how can you disconnect from your mind? And she said, you have to tell yourself that this is work, otherwise you cannot do it. You have to lie to yourself. And this is also why the pro-prostitution lobby is so aggressive very often. Because if they would admit to themselves that this is sexual violence what they experience, all of their dissociated pain would come up. Now, I asked a woman who went voluntarily into prostitution, you know, for a lover boy trafficker, how it was the first day. This is what she said. I remember the first day very well. I was shocked, first because we had to work totally naked. And at that time, I was so afraid of the man. I didn't want to admit that it was my first day, and so I swallowed my fear away. I smiled. The first time, with the first man, I felt as it wasn't me. It wasn't me. I was totally away from myself, in a different dimension. I didn't feel anything. I also wasn't ashamed because I wasn't there. This wasn't me. In the brothel, I was totally derealized. The feeling of shame appeared later in total different situations. I became scary, and the feeling of shame never let go of me. The feeling of shame got a new face today. I am deeply disappointed of myself. This woman is now 9 years out of prostitution, and she is afraid of all men. She's scared going out of her apartment. She's scared to be sexually harassed by men, to be gazed by men, to be touched by men. She's now afraid of everything she experienced daily in prostitution, but didn't feel it that time because she was dissociated. Next page, please. There are 4 hormones that are involved in PTSD. Adrenaline, our body gets in a condition to be able to fight back and keep us alive or to flee. cortisol that gives us the energy in order to execute the fight and flight action. This is what I said before. And if you dissociate opioids, these are natural morphines that prevent us from pain, but they block all other emotions also. So sometimes it can happen that women go back, women who get raped and talk about what happened to them, they say it without emotions. And there's also, some also develop oxytocin when they have lots of pain that promotes good feelings, and good feelings also block pain. The body gets in a condition so that we feel good, and people can then describe the trauma and smile, and this can be very confusing. It's important to know those reactions, and if you have patients, to explain it also to them. Because I had, for example, one patient who lost a very good friend, and she was so much in pain that, you know, she developed oxytocin, and then she laughed when she was talking about it. And she was ashamed of it because she didn't know why she did it. Next page, please. The brain learns to dissociate and remembers it. This is an experience done by a traumatologist in the US called Van der Kolk. And this is a couple that was in a car accident, in a severe car accident. And they were put into a computer tomograph, and somebody was saying how the accident happened. And they had different reactions. Like on the left side, the man had a fight and flight reaction, a fear reaction, and the woman dissociated on the right side. Why? And Van der Kolk also asked himself, why did they have different reaction? It was the same trauma. And then he discussed, you know, he made an anamnesis of both of them, and he realized that the woman experienced mistreatment in her childhood. So the brain gets trained to dissociation. This also explains the high rate of re-victimization, because the people, well, the women don't fight back. In my hometown, for example, a man was sentenced for having raped a woman in the street, and he was asked by the judge why he did it, and he said he tried to rape several women that night. All tried to defend themselves, and she didn't. So the fear must have triggered her learned dissociation. Next page, please. Often it is argued that people in prostitution should organize themselves and fight for their rights. But this is difficult or even impossible, because they perish in prostitution, not after years, but immediately. This is how the survivor Sandra Nora describes it. For me, the inhibition threshold to get intimate with the first panther was very high. Feelings like disgust and nausea, shame, grief, and fear made it nearly impossible for me to do it. I soon began screaming and crying. When the act was over, something inside of me got destroyed. I wanted to scream, but I could not. I wanted to cry, but I could not do it anymore. My feelings were numbed and killed. The ability to defend and resist gets more and more lost, the more panthers you have, because due to unwanted penetration, not only does dissociation rule your body, but your personality gets more and more broken. The act of penetration means a permanent humiliation and degradation as an object of sexual use. You are deprived of your human dignity and stop noticing yourself as a human with feelings. This is one of the reasons why many victims of human trafficking remain in prostitution. Their personality, their will, their identity are broken. Next page. If there were just a phenomenon of dissociation, the damages from prostitution would be limited to that level. But there are also traumatic memories. During dissociation, the body and the cortex are largely anesthetized. One perceives things, but they aren't all remembered in the cortex. Parts of the experience is recorded in another part of the brain, which is called traumatic memory. The traumatic memory doesn't function on the same principle as the cortex. It's a kind of black box to which we don't have conscious access and we don't even know that it exists. This memory collects traumatic experiences in a disorderly way, without a sense of space and time. And it isn't semantic. It doesn't have language. It can be brought on at any moment by trigger that revive the trauma, what was not felt at that moment. Can be a smell, a color, a sound, images, words, phrases, a nightmare, a time. At that moment, it triggers an intense anxiety, as if the person was living the trauma at that very instant again. It's a flashback. A flashback is not only a fear reaction, but can also be sentences that were related to the situation, like you are nothing, you should be dead, you are not worth anymore, anything better. And also feelings that were switched off during prostitution can come up, like shame, disgust. Like, as I said, during prostitution, women usually don't feel shame. The shame comes up later. I know one woman who went back and back to prostitution because she couldn't bear the feeling of shame when she exited prostitution. So the recovering is also something very painful because it includes feeling the traumatic experiences once again. These reactions are known as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's likely having a time bomb in the air. And very often it doesn't work with an on-off function. The alarm system can be constantly overactivated. People go sometimes through life with constant fear. They are under constant distress. So next page, please. This is why prostitution leaves long-term consequences like PTSD. Numerous studies have shown that the risk of developing a PTSD is much higher in prostitution than it is going to war. Here are listed only 5 studies who have been peer-reviewed, but there are much more. Those who continue to deny the harm of prostitution are comparable to climate change deniers. The recovery is additionally difficult because most of the women have no access to medical and therapeutical care. And even if they get professional help, recovery will depend on many factors: stability, can they build a new life, can they get education, how long were they in prostitution, the age of entrance and the age of exit, do they exit with physical illnesses, and so on. The women in Germany are crushed down in the sex industry and then sent back traumatized in their home country. Next page, please. Next. And next I will And this is how it often looks like on the victim side. Trauma-related responses are in the foreground. The will of these women has been broken. They are in a psychological position where they cannot defend themselves, and perpetrators can do whatever they want with them. They stay in prostitution not because of love anymore, but because of the trauma and fear. They are too weak to get out on their own. They need help, and also psychological help, to understand what has been done to them and process it. Next page. So I made this slide to summarize as a summary of what I said, to show what kind of influences the trafficked person, that women in prostitution are exposed. The state and the society doesn't speak out the harm of prostitution. When a state doesn't name violence as violence, then you normalize violence in society. Severe human dignity violations that take place in prostitution are no longer seen as such. A pathology is normalized. The police has not developed the skills to identify the victims. The trafficked women stay undetected and are perceived as workers. There is no justice. The great majority of the perpetrators remain unpunished. The trafficked women live in an environment where they know they will find no justice. The helping structures don't focus to help the women to exit prostitution. And of course, the victim's vulnerability is not seen. Poverty, her age, no schooling, not speaking the language, isolation, and so on. So it's nearly impossible to escape the system. And if you can't escape physically, then you have to escape by your mind. You dissociate from your body. What you have in German brothels are bodies who are dissociated from the person. In conclusion, I would give an example. I had a psychotherapeutical EMDR session with a woman who was trafficked, and she came with a picture she wanted to overcome. And this picture was that she got beaten up by her trafficker pimp. And I asked her why exactly this picture. She said, because there were his friends from outside the milieu with him. They saw this and they didn't help me. And this makes it more difficult for the victim to integrate the trauma when the trauma is not recognized. The German state, but also we as a German society, we have become a society that looks away to fundamental human rights violation. We have become co-perpetrators with this law, introducing the Nordic model with the punishment of the sex buyers will also help victims to recover, because the perpetrators are named by society and the burden does not remain on the victims. So this was my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It was a lot. I
That
hope
was a
you.
lot, but very, very, very interesting for us. And really, I wanted to thank you because you have showed us in such a clear way the detrimental and the devastating consequences of legalizing prostitution and how it harms women and who are the ones that take profit in this slavery. So I am sure that the students of the masters, after our break, will be eager to debate about this and to ask you questions about your presentation. That has been great. Thank you very much.
So
So
we see each other
Yes, it's 7:30 almost. So let's say at 7:50 in the last link I sent you by mail, Ingeborg. Okay, so
So
what
7:50 we see each other again.
at 7:50, you will see with the students, and Laura is the one that is going to moderate the debate and help you with the questions and helping translate some of the students if they struggle with English, so that it's more it's clearer for everyone. So
So
thank you very much, Ingeborg, and see you later. Y para el resto de la audiencia que tenemos hoy, que todavía no son alumnas o alumnos del máster, lo dejamos aquí y os esperamos en la próxima Open Master Session. Gracias a todas y a todos.